Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Well, okay. Hey, we've got a great group already on here, Scott. So we're live. Hey, my name is A.J. Mathieu, and the handsome gent on the other side of the screen is Scott Ball. And we're both guides with the Malphurs Group, and we're super excited that you're joining us. So today is a live version of the Church Revitalization Podcast. This is episode 54, and we're talking about planning for 2021, and which, if Scott's poll was up there, you could have maybe given us some feedback about your upcoming plan, or whether you even have a plan or know what planning is, because maybe you don't. We talk with people that are not good planners, but we're here to help. That's kind of what we do. So thanks for joining us. And so we're starting off this episode with, and by the way, we do this every week. We don't go live every week, but this is the Church Revitalization Podcast, and we would love to have you as a subscriber. And you can find that at, where's the best place for them to subscribe, Scott? Where
anywhere
should we tell
you
people to
listen
go?
to podcasts, really. Just
There you go.
Yeah, you can find us.
Search for it. So, hey, 2020 has been quite a year, and fortunately, we're in the last little bit. So isn't that good? Are we glad that we're almost done with 2020? But you know what? Churches have been paralyzed since March. Many churches have. Maybe yours hasn't. We hope it hasn't, but a lot of churches have been sort of paralyzed in this holding pattern, kind of waiting to find out whether what we're experiencing is going to stick around long term, or whether it's going to go away at some point.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have the answer to that. But what we do know is that paralyzation is not where God wants us to be. And and where we are today won't be permanent. I mean, regardless of what today looks like, I think we can say with 100% certainty, today is not every day for eternity.
That's true.
Things are always changing. I mean, we didn't see this coming in February, and we don't know what's coming tomorrow or a minute from now, right? So we know that God is still at work, and that he has a plan for his church, a magnificent and wonderful plan to reach the world with the good news of Jesus as our Savior, and our one and only option for reconciliation with God. And we know that his church continues to be on mission, and that's what he wants the church to continue to do. So that's our foundation for today. We're trying to come up with a plan for 2021 so that your church can be ready to execute to the greatest of your ability, to the greatest effort that God has enabled you to do, to maximize that impact of making and maturing disciples of Jesus. So
here's the questions, AJ, that I'm hearing a lot. I talk with pastors every day. So, like, are people going to come back? I was talking with somebody the other day. They've been open since May 31st, and they're still at 30 to 35%. Will giving of their pre-COVID attendance, will giving stay up? Is it going to, or if it's been down, will it go back up? If it's been up, is it going to go down? People don't know. Again, another church I was talking with, they were their giving has actually gone up, but they're wondering, when is that shoe going to drop? So their attendance doesn't match their giving, and so they're nervous. They're like, is that shoe going to drop? And they asked me, they're like, is that going to go away? And I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. Is the mask thing forever? My gut says no, but I don't know. I mean, to some degree, maybe it's with us for a long time. Do new people want to visit churches? You know, are we just maybe need to be concerned about trying to get our pre-COVID folks back in the door, or do we need to just pivot and be thinking about new people? What does staffing and staff roles look like moving forward? Because apparently now, in addition to being a church, you're also a production company, because you produce a TV show every week. And so how does that impact your staffing? And speaking of staffing, what did children and student ministries look like? How do we need to do them differently moving forward forever? How do we do it sustainably? These are the questions that I hear almost every day. And so I don't know. In the comments, maybe let me know, are these some of the questions that are also on your mind? Perhaps so. So the root question is, how can we make a solid plan for 2021 when there are so many variables, AJ, that are just totally unknowable. That I think at the core of it, there is this, I don't think people are paralyzed because they're bad leaders or because they're afraid. I think it's that it's really difficult to feel like you can make a good plan when there are so many multivariate issues that we just don't have resolutions to. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love, as we begin to unpack this now here in just a moment, I love the simplicity of us being able to go back to some foundational things and go, oh yeah, almost doesn't matter what's happening in the world around us. We can come up with a plan because we've got some foundations that are never changing that we can go back on. I mean, and I was thinking earlier, Scott, before we went live, and it just, as we've been chatting this morning, I mean, this seems like such an overwhelming situation, you know, with 2020 and just what has happened. And, you know, and part of this question is, you know, can a church grow? Or can a church be healthy? Can a church continue reaching people with the gospel and making disciples in this present circumstance? And I'm thinking back and I'm like, well, gosh, could it happen in, you know, the 1st century AD in Jerusalem, you know, under the Roman Empire? Could it happen in the 2nd century, in the 3rd century? I mean, you know, could the church grow under a Caesar who, you know, had a decree to kill Christians? Could the church grow? Could it grow in China in 2020? Or, you know, I mean, and we've got in Iran, I mean, at our church this weekend, you know, there's a ministry happening, an online ministry happening in Iran that our church supports, that it pre-COVID was adding, I forget what they said, maybe like, I don't know, 50 believers a week, something like that. I mean, pretty respectable in Iran. But because of COVID, people are not out, people are home, and they're watching this online. They're looking for content online. Now they're reaching like 500 new believers a week in Iran in this ministry. So, hey, has COVID destroyed the church? No, it hasn't. Absolutely not.
Well, that's a good pivot to the first point we want to make. So when we say, how do we make a plan for 2021 when there are so many variables that we don't have resolution to? The first step is to start with what we do know. So there are lots of things you don't know and can't know the answer to, and you need to start with what we do know. And this is what you were saying, AJ. So your mission's not changed. It's to make and mature disciples. And this feels like a no-brainer thing that shouldn't even have to be said. But when I'm talking to churches every day, and they're asking the questions that I was listing before about, you know, student ministry and giving and this and that and the other thing, most churches have gotten so sidelined by the tangential stuff that they've really forgotten the core mandate. So the fundamental question we always have to come back to first is, can we make disciples when things are uncertain? And like you were saying, AJ, the answer to that has to be yes. If your knee-jerk reaction as a leadership team, when you meet with your elders or your staff or your deacons or whatever board, if their knee-jerk reaction is no, we need to focus maybe on keeping the lights on, or just trying to keep things afloat, or just spin the plates until things get less weird and more normal. I got to say, like, I've got bad news. Your church might not survive this episode, because God is on the hunt for churches that want to make and mature disciples regardless of the adversity. So I think that it's not just like a okay, that's a given kind of thing for us to say, well, we got to start with the fundamental question of, can we make disciples when things are uncertain? We have to go back there, because if our answer to that is not yes, of course we can, then you really can't make a plan that's going to work. Is that fair to say? Sorry, I turn and look because this is where I can see AJ's face. The camera is here, but AJ's face is over here. I think it's not a small thing to say we have to start with what we do know, which is we can make disciples when things are uncertain. Yeah,
regardless of circumstance. I mean, that was true last year. It's true now. It'll be true next year.
Okay, the second thing, sort of, I know people are like, get to the practical thing. All right, let me tell you. So number 2, you need a framework. Every church is unique, but the fundamentals of church health are universal. At the Malphurs Group, we use the strategic envisioning framework. And this framework maximizes your impact by shoring up your church around the 5 fundamentals of church health. Patrick Lencioni famously wrote a book called The Advantage, which is a great read. It's obviously more business oriented, but it's a good read. And the whole premise of the book is that finding a business or an organization that is healthy is so rare that any organization or business that is healthy has an advantage, a distinct advantage, a competitive advantage over any other organization or business. And I can tell you, I've been doing this work now, and AJ and I have been doing this work with churches, hundreds of churches. I can tell you for a fact that this is true in churches. Mm-hmm. Church health is so rare that the churches that are truly healthy have such a distinct advantage, AJ, over the churches that are not. And so when we talk about getting a plan for 2021, we need to build that plan around church health. Is that a fair thing to say? I mean, we need a framework for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any church that, I don't know, I guess that's doing well is either A, lucky, or B, has a plan.
Right. So in The Advantage, actually, sorry to keep referencing that book, but Patrick Lencioni kind of talks about there are two components to making it. One is being smart and the other is being healthy. And there are churches that are right now that are making it because they're smart, but they won't make it long-term unless they're both smart and healthy. And so a lot of churches right now, they're trying to find smart solutions to things, but that's not the sustainable method for growth and sustainability. It's health, church health. So let's walk through, AJ, the five fundamentals of church health. And then I want to just bear with me, because these things are not going to sound like rocket science to you, but I want to show you how making your plan for 2021 starts with working around these 5 fundamentals of church health. Okay. Is that fair?
Let's do it.
Will all of you tuning in bear with me? I promise you there's a payoff. So we got to start with the first fundamental of church health is asking the question, what is our mandate? So there's that mission again that we already talked about. If we aren't intentionally, AJ, and urgently about the Great Commission as a church, then we're going to fail as a church. It's one of the examples that we use when we work with churches is, and I probably should have gotten a picture and shown it to you, to everybody on live, but it's like a burger place that gets distracted by making tacos and forgets to focus on making good burgers. We will compare and contrast sort of the menu of Jack in the Box. Raise your hand online if you've got Jack in the Box where you live, and versus In-N-Out. So I know we have at least one person tuning in from California. I saw that earlier, and I know that they've got In-N-Out now in Texas. But the menu for In-N-Out is burger, fries, shake. And I can't even get into the menu for Jack in the Box. I will just say it ends with a section, AJ, called something different. They have so many different things on their menu. They needed a whole section called something different. And when you compare that then with Consumer Reports satisfaction scores, AJ, on the burgers.
Yeah.
It's In-N-Out is number 2 on the list, and Jack in the Box is second to last on the list. And what's interesting is you look at the list, I think there's like 25 or 26 different restaurants on the list, is that the complexity, AJ, of the menu increases as you get further and further down that list, because they're getting further and further and further away, AJ, from the core thing they're supposed to be about, which is burgers.
Yeah.
And so as a church, you kind of have to start with this question, what is our mandate? It's to make the commission great again, right? And to really care about the Great Commission and to make that the core of what you are doing. And when it's not surprising when that church health is failing and we don't know what to do in 2021. Any thoughts on that before I move on to the second component?
It can't be overstated enough. I mean, no. and I want to make sure everybody watching doesn't let this get past you. So, I mean, let's just say this again very clearly. Your church needs to be about making and maturing disciples of Jesus. The Great Commission is the mission of your church. However stated for your personal context, you do that. You use language that makes sense for your people and where you are. But we just have to drive this point home. Without this as your core mission, you're already off. Your compass is off. And when you get 100 miles down the road, or 1,000, or a year, or whatever whatever you want to look at, you're way off. A little deviation here is way off down the road. So set your compass to your true north, the Great Commission, and now you're on the path. This is the first thing we're talking about is our mandate. We're establishing this first step on the path, and this is the correct path.
Sorry, I'm chuckling a little bit because Travis in the comments says that Jack in the Box tacos are 100. And
see, I was going to say, you're going to find a rabid Jack in the Box taco fan out there, Scott, that you're stepping on some toes because
you know what?
Everybody wants a taco made with an iron. And
a Jack in the Box taco is edible. And they put enough chemicals in it to make it taste addictive. But as far as burgers go, you're not thinking, man, I want a burger. I know, I'll go to Jack in the Box. So that'd be the point. Travis did note that, yes, In-N-Out burgers are the best. They are. All right, number 2. So we got mission. Second, 2, what motivates us? So if we're supposed to make disciples, okay, but we don't know what the ingredients to discipleship are, then we're going to miss the mark at making and maturing disciples. So your core values determine the kind of disciples your church is going to make. So if you look around, like COVID has exposed this. If you look around your church and you see a bunch of immature Christians, the chances are you've unintentionally programmed destructive values into the culture and the ministry DNA of your church.
Ouch.
Like, I'm just being honest with you. So if you're going, man, people are disengaging, people are falling off the map, you've built that. You built that. That's the culture you built. That's the discipleship culture you built at your church. If people could drop church at the drop of a hat, you built that. So if you say, oh, values are fine, but these are the results that COVID has brought or wrought in your church is total disengagement from church, then probably your values aren't okay. Probably that's an indicator that you may be valuing a lot of the right things, but you might have some hidden values that are unhealthy, that are superseding or overriding the healthy things that you do value. And so in terms of making a plan for 2021, you have to go, well, what is it that we're trying to build here? Not only are we trying to make and mature disciples generally as a mission, what kind of disciple is it that we're trying to make and mature at our church? And you are built for the results that you get. So if you see a bunch of immature Christians, your ministry is built for a bunch of immature Christians. I don't really know any other way to say that, AJ, other than that's the truth.
That's harsh. But we're not here just to mess around, and we're not here to make you feel good. We're here to help your church be what it should be about. Yeah. All
right. So this is the third question. So first, mission. What is our mandate? Second question, what motivates us? Those are our core values. Third question, how are we going to structure ministry? So COVID killed or paused a lot of your programs for a lot of churches. And how do you know which ones should come back? Which ones should stay dead? How do you know the difference? Developing a clear discipleship pathway with clear discipleship outcomes for each step in your pathway, that empowers your church to restructure or to reorganize and to reinvent ministries for this new, weird, post-quarantine, post-COVID church for 2021. So really, if you want to make a plan for 2021, the real planning, obviously, it's got to be rooted in those foundational things of what is it that we're trying to accomplish in making mature disciples, and then what kind of disciples. That's foundational. You have to start there. But then when you get to the truly planning part now in step 3, based on that data, what it is we're trying to do and what that looks like, that culture we're trying to build, you have to then re-examine all of the ministries, all the things that you're doing, and go, okay, what sticks, what stays, what goes, and how are we going to move people through that process moving forward, so that we become less about the programs themselves and more about the discipleship outcomes within the people in our church.
Yeah.
So the third question is, how are we going to structure ministry? This is a discipleship pathway question, and I think it's a very critical one, AJ, for churches to be tackling right now. That a lot of churches haven't taken the time to tackle right now.
Yeah. And here's a little bonus hack as well. Don't automatically assume that something that's well attended is providing you with the greatest results.
Yeah.
Because people will line up for free candy every time it's offered.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to get cavities, and it's not going to give them it's not going to provide the sustenance that they need. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're automatically like, oh well, let's just set this ministry aside, this program aside, because that thing is blowing and going. Well, yeah, maybe it is, but what are the outputs of it? And that's the differentiator that we're talking about here, and that's building things to outputs, not to attendance or inputs or whatever quantity metric that you want to use on it. Of course, we want things to be largely attended. We want people to do things that are right and good for them.
Sure.
But you've got to measure what the results are of that ministry, not just how many people are participating in it.
That's such a good point. I was working with a church in Texas earlier this year and this summer, and they were going through the litany of all their stuff that they had going on. And one of the things was pretty well attended, even in COVID. It wasn't an on-site thing. It was a thing they were doing remotely. At any rate, but their groups were just withering on the vine and dying. And as they were kind of mapping out their discipleship pathway and talking through it, they were saying, the groups is where we're going to get the most bang for our buck in terms of discipleship outcomes, AJ. But they've struggled, but they have these sort of competing programs. And I was like, why do you have this competing program when you want them to be in a group? And they said, well, because the groups weren't being very well attended, so we created this other option as something for people to attend. And I said, hold on, but you would rather, if people had to choose between this or this, you'd rather them do the group, right? They said, well, yeah. And I said, so why was your response to people don't want to go to a group, let's do this other thing? You sabotaged your groups. Why was your response not, let's fix groups? And they were like, that's a good point. And they were wondering, gosh, groups are dying. I'm like, well, because you keep giving them alternatives. You keep saying, well, never mind, don't worry about doing a group, do this thing instead. And so when you distract people with spiritual junk food, to your point, AJ, they'll pick the junk food every time, and they won't do the So anyways, I'm glad to tell you they're course correcting now and kind of closing some of these things so that they can funnel folks back into the thing that they want them to do. And they're also improving it and trying to figure out why people didn't want to join their groups in the first place. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, let's pause for a second, because I want us to address a question here that Mike put in the comments. So he's saying that we were talking a lot about the church having a responsibility, but where is the stress for individual responsibility?
Yeah.
And he said that if somebody has an intimate relationship with the Father, nothing will pull them apart. So yeah, let's differentiate personal responsibility and church responsibility. Absolutely, there's two components there. People do have a responsibility for their own personal growth.
Yeah.
And whenever you enter into a relationship with Christ as your Savior, you gain the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit certainly is a huge driving factor in people. I mean, it's that's our guide. Then the Spirit drives us into what we choose to do, what we choose not to do. But so let me kind of simplify this and take this back kind of like to step one. So how would somebody become a believer? I think the Bible is fairly clear that Christ instituted his church for the purpose of spreading the good news of who he is and what he came to do. God's intent for reaching the world is through the church. Now, okay, so what is the church? Well, the church is people. The church is not a building. The church isn't, First Baptist on the corner or, Greater Assembly of Righteousness and Enlightenment. So the church is people. So one person telling one other person the good news. I mean, that's the church in function. And so, yeah, somebody then accepts this message, becomes a believer. And is that the end, though? Is that, well, the Bible is telling us that God has given the apostles, the prophets, the teachers, for what purpose? Well, to build the church, to build people up in their gifting as a part of the body. So the church is the body of Christ, and the hand does what the hand does, and the foot does what the foot does, and not everybody is everything. And so the church is this collection of people. So when we begin to come together then, and we're missing a hand, well, we need to cultivate a hand. We need to get somebody in place for the hand. So the church absolutely has a responsibility to provide opportunities for people to grow in their faith. The church cannot take the ultimate responsibility for whether that person accepts what is presented to them. It's a leading a horse to water situation. But we cannot abdicate the responsibility of a church saying, hey, we're a collection of believers and we intend to help you grow in your faith. We can't then say, here's the Bible, good luck, go off on your own, or, oh, you're a believer, you have the Holy Spirit. Okay, bye. There's no need for you to come back. So, I think we can clearly see that the church has a responsibility and the individual has a responsibility. For our purposes today, we're talking about the church.
I was going to say, so we typically talk about this. They say there's three stakeholders when it comes to spiritual growth. We got what the Lord does. Like none of us grow without the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives. And then there's the individual's role to make every effort, as Peter says, to make every effort to add to your faith these things. And then there's the Ephesians 4 concept, right? Of God gave the leaders of the church to be equippers of ministry so that we all might attain full maturity. And to your question, Mike, just to bring this home, we're just taking, what we're talking about today is the church taking full responsibility for its role. You can't take responsibility for how an individual responds, or for what the Lord is going to do, but you can take full responsibility for what your church is doing. And I would say the church is leagues away from from taking too much ownership for spiritual growth, right? Yeah. You're not too close to that boundary, I promise. So when we talk about these 5 fundamentals of church health, we're talking about what it is the church can do and the role that God has given the church. And it's not everything, but it's a lot. So let's recap where we are so far. We got 5 fundamentals for church health. First is, what is our mandate? It's the mission. What motivates us? That's core values. Third, how are we going to structure ministry? That's your discipleship pathway. That's where a lot of the planning for 2021 needs to be probably spent in that third question. The fourth question, where are we going? So many churches are struggling. This is the vision question. So many churches are struggling right now merely because they don't see light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know if anybody's ever been depressed. I'm a person who has dealt with depression in the past. In a very real sense, churches are feeling depressed. Your church won't be successful in 2021 without a real compelling mental image of the future and of the bridge you need to build to get there. I'm just going to tell you, just on a personal level, when I was battling depression, the thing that was finally able to bring me out of that is having something to look forward to. Go, okay, it's small things. I'm going to go get coffee with this person. I've got, there's this vacation that's months away that I'm looking forward to with my family. Oh, I've got this trip coming up working with this church or whatever. Like there's just, you had to have these little milestone things to look forward to and go, okay, this is where we're headed. I can see that. That's going to be good. That's going to be exciting. And there are so many churches right now that they don't have that. They don't see light at the end of the tunnel. They don't see the good things that are coming down the pike and where it is that they want to go. And so that it's causing organizational depression. It can cause you to kind of turn inward and go, nothing is ever going to be better. And I was talking with someone the other day, man, and this pastor is just riding a roller coaster. When the attendance is finally a little bit okay that week, he's good. And then the next week it's not so good. And then he's down here. Like, that is not sustainable. You can't live in that zone. You got to have a compelling picture of where it is that your church is trying to go and let that motivate you and push you forward. So if you're struggling right now, getting motivated to plan for 2021, my guess is you might not have a real clear picture of where it is that you're trying to go. Anything you want to say to that, AJ?
Yeah, well, I always like to say right here, because I think so. There's a lot of talk about church vision, and I know pastors hear that a lot. And in my experience, a lot of them don't feel visionary,
Yeah.
and I always find them to be more visionary than they give themselves credit for. And it's typically because they're so crowded. There's
Uh-huh.
so much going on around them all the time. There's always that next Sunday. There's always that next sermon to prepare for, and it's really hard to clear the clutter and get into vision. And so, that's one of the things that I really enjoy doing with pastors, is to just take a little bit of that time and to dig a little bit. And it typically is much faster to get to start, mining some vision
Yeah.
than they usually think. And so don't beat yourself up on that and say, oh, here's more of that vision stuff, and I'm not a
Yeah.
visionary person.
And vision isn't
I
just
think you are.
goals, right? So vision isn't like, oh, in 5 years I want to own a boat. Okay. No, 5 years, vision is like 5 years from now, I see myself, I'm on the boat and the sun is setting down across the water. And I'm surrounded by my family and friends, and we're having a great time. We're listening to, Jimmy Buffett as the sun is setting, and like that's vision, right? Sometimes pastors get trapped because they think, okay, 5 years, we're going to hit this number. We're going to do like, that's not vision. There's nothing about a number that is inspiring. What's inspiring is a picture. And so if your vision is just data on a piece of paper that you're hoping to hit in 2021, that's not going to drive you forward. You really need a picture in your mind, a movie in your mind of what the future can look like.
Yeah. Yep. That's good.
All right, number 5, last component of church health is, what will we do this year? So this is the simple question, to be honest, that you may have thought that we would have only focused on in this, but this is a question that's either asked too early, AJ, or not at all. So if you ask the strategy question first without fully answering the previous 4 questions, you're going to end up wasting time on projects that don't matter. But if you invest time and energy in answering those first 4 questions, but never ask, what are we going to do this year, then you're never actually going to change or do anything meaningful in 2021. So strategy objectives are where the rubber meets the road. And if you can narrow your focus to 3 to 5 projects, you'll actually get them done. So another mistake is that churches go, here's 15 things we're going to get done in 2021. You won't do them. You might do 1 or none, and then you're going to be really frustrated and depressed. If you can narrow your focus to 3 to 5 things, you'll actually get them done. I worked with a church in Roanoke, Virginia earlier this year, and got the pastor contacted me in August, and he said, we our 3 to 5 projects we had mapped out back in February, pre-COVID. He said, we did them. We're done. Like we got them done, and it's the end of August. He was happy, obviously. He was like, what do we do? What do we do now? And I was like, you plan for 2021, right? Like you make new projects for next year. But he was stunned. He's in this church that has been like dying for the last decade or more. And he was like, we actually got these projects finished. What do we do next? I said, you plan the next ones, right? So if you'll narrow your focus to a handful of things, you can actually get them done, even if you're a church that isn't used to getting things done. So let me just recap. So our first point is start with things you know. The second point is you need a framework. The framework we use is the 5 elements of church health strategic envisioning framework. What is our mandate? What motivates us? How are we going to structure ministry? Where are we going? And what will we do this year? If you can answer those 5 questions, you're going to be in good shape. So, which leads to step 3 now, which is you need to work the framework. The biggest mistake churches make is they assume that they have that. I mean, you might be there's lots of you on here. You might be going like, I got all those. I got all five. We're good. Really? They're usually not really. Maybe your church has 1 or 2, like you got a good mission statement, you got a good set of core values, maybe you got a discipleship pathway. But sometimes even in those things, the execution is off. So that church that I just mentioned earlier that in Texas, they had a 3-step discipleship pathway. And as they were kind of mapping that out to me, mentally I was like, okay, good. All right, yeah, that's a huge head start. But then when we started getting into the weeds on what they actually do, what the ministry actually looked like, it was a total mess. So they had a pathway on paper, but the execution of that was extremely sloppy. and it had been crowded out by extraneous programs. And then COVID hit. And so instead of simplifying, they actually stratified what they were doing even more. So now they're stuck not only trying to resurrect the ministries that COVID had shut down, but they're also trying to spin the plates of these COVID-friendly ministries that they had started to keep things afloat. I was exhausted, AJ, just kind of listening to it. So the church had all the concepts right, but they really weren't working the framework. So I know that mission and values and discipleship pathway and vision and strategy, these are not rocket science. And I know that you know what these things are. But how clear is your church actually on all 5 of these right now? Like, just you can put it in the comments if you want. But give yourself a little self-grade. Self-grade yourself on all 5 of those things. When churches aren't reaching their full potential, 100% of the time, AJ, you can back me up on this, 100% of the time, they're deficient in at least one of these 5 areas.
Yeah.
At least one. So kind of looping back to the question, how can you plan for 2021? You need to work the framework in light of these new variables. I've seen there's a couple questions. I want to pause for questions real fast. And then I've got one bonus hack before we start to wrap up. So AJ, questions?
I'm seeing this one here from Frank. Are you seeing that one, Scott? About
that's what I'm seeing. Examples of projects. So, Frank, when we talk about projects, we generally will map one project to each area in your discipleship pathway. So that's why we say 3 to 5, because when we work with churches on developing a discipleship pathway, that pathway has 3 to 5 steps. So we let's just make something up. Let's say you have a very simple 3-step gather, grow, go discipleship pathway, and your 3 primary programs that align with each step, your gather steps, your Sunday morning worship, your grow steps, small groups, and your go step is something community outreach oriented. Okay, that very simple. We would say then, when we get to the strategy question, what are we going to do this year? We're looking for how can you improve in each of those 3 areas. So you might find that your biggest weakness on the gather step is your assimilation process. I was working with a church recently where their assimilation process was barely existent and mostly a dumpster fire. So they realized that over the next year, that's the thing that they need to fix. They've got to work on their whole church management software. They got to work on their follow-up, guest follow-up process, and integrating now sort of the online thing with the in-person thing. That means it's going to take them a whole year to build an assimilation process that actually works. On your grow step, you might realize that our groups are not growing, that we've had the same 60 people in our Sunday school classes or in our small groups for the last 5 years. We've not really added hardly any new people. People are getting stuck. They're not moving forward. So you might say, we're going to reinvent our strategy for groups. And then on the go piece, lots of times what I find is churches have like 5 or 6 different community outreach ministries that they have going on, and there's no like connective tissue between any of them, and it's very niche. Like, these 5 people work on this thing and these 3 people work on this thing, and they're not communicating. So spending a year maybe unifying all of your outreach efforts, coordinating them, identifying the ones that are actually effective, bringing them under one banner category, and then driving participation in those community outreach efforts through your groups so that you're moving people sequentially from groups into an outreach strategy. Like that process. So I don't know, every church is different. So what you're going to have to work on in your church is going to be unique, but that would be what we're talking about. What is one way that you can improve in each of those areas that align with your discipleship pathway, whether that's 3 steps, 4 steps, or 5 steps. Did I explain that okay, AJ?
Yeah, that was good. I'm actually glad that Frank asked that question, because I think a lot of times there's confusion. And when people start talking about projects, I think a lot of what comes to mind is like, what type of outreach project should we be doing in our community?
Sure.
Especially, and he said appropriate for these times. Appropriate for these times may not even be relevant. I mean, the right thing to do to work on in your church may or may not have a connection that's appropriate to these times. because there's a lot of foundational things that
Yeah.
might need to be worked on that are, they'll work regardless of what's happening in the world around us.
Yeah.
So, so Bobby asked, how do you help a church see what they are on paper is not really the practice or culture? And as we work through, especially like these 5 questions, that certainly starts to bring those things into the light. And that's also, I mean, let me just kind of make a plug for working with a guide. I mean, that's the value of a guide as well. When you've got outside eyes on something, being able to say, wait a minute, you're saying this is supposed to be working this way, but we're not really seeing the fruit of that. And the other piece is that, again, whenever we take a church through the framework, there's a leadership team that goes through it together. So that's also very eye-opening a lot. I mean, maybe the pastor might be seeing we're not really doing what we say we're doing, but whenever you get another, group of leaders in the room as well, who maybe haven't even taken the time to look at these things, and then they're exposed to the fact that, oh, wow, yeah, we're not really getting the outputs that we think our programs are designed to do. So that's the primary ways in which a church can begin to see that what's on paper is not really what's happening in the real world.
So, Bobby, another thing I would say on that is it's very important to bring some level of objectivity into something that is otherwise subjective. Okay, so is a ministry good or not good? I don't know. How do we know that? Based on what? Its attendance? Well, we already talked about how that may or may not be an indicator of how successful it is. Mm-hmm. So we've sort of hinted at this and said, well, it has to be based on the outcomes you're trying to achieve. So we look at these things sequentially. This is going to tie in here to the bonus hack I want to give you. But if you say, all right, here are our core values, Bobby. We say these are the things we're trying to achieve, what a disciple looks like. We can then use that as a grid, Bobby, to assess your ministries. So if a ministry is supposed to lead a person to be a worshiper and to love the scripture and to share their faith, right? And then you look at this particular ministry and go, well, does it do those 3 things? Does it lead them to be a worshiper? Yes or no? But from 1 to 5, right? What we do in our framework and in our process, Bobby, is try to bring some level of objectivity to something that is otherwise completely subjective. And to what AJ is saying is when you do that with a team, they have these aha moments and they go, oh, I thought this was a good thing. But when I look at it in light of what it's supposed to do, it's not a good thing. Or if you were to say, gosh, I think we really need to improve, our small group ministry. Why? Could you give a rationale for that? Could you prove why it needs to work or be different? When you're able to kind of map that to your values and say, it's because we need to improve this because it's not doing X, Y, or Z. It's not living up to this DNA. It's not living up to this standard. Then people can track that with you and go, yeah, you're exactly right. It doesn't. But when you're just saying, well, I think we need to change stuff, people are not up for that. It needs to be rooted in something. That's why the core values work is not tangential. It's not small. It's not inconsequential. It matters because it becomes the breeding ground for your rationale for making changes at the sort of ministry structural and programming and discipleship levels. Okay, let me give you this last hack. It's this. The hack is you need to always start assessing your church health at step 1. So when churches are struggling, or when you're in this kind of weird, super weird year that 2020 is, and you're trying to plan for 2021, the natural tendency is to want to start at step 5 and look at, well, what do we need to focus on this year?
Yeah. What needs to be our new strategy?
Yeah. What's our new strategy for 2021? We want to start there. And then if we can't get clarity there, then we start working backwards and go, well, maybe we need to work on our vision. And if we can't get any clarity there, then we go to step 3 and go, okay, well, maybe we need to restructure our ministries, right? So we want to start at 5 and move backwards. This is a mistake. There's a natural progression, like I was just talking about in answering Bobby's question, but from mission to core values. So the mission is to make mature disciples. What's a disciple? From values to discipleship pathway. So here's what a disciple looks like. Okay, now our ministry is accomplishing that. Is our programs accomplishing our values? And then from discipleship pathway to vision. Okay, so if we were to do ministry this way, what end would that produce? Where would we be going? That's the vision question. And then by the time you get to the strategy question, it becomes obvious exactly what it is you need to do. You don't have to go, gosh, what should we do? But if you kind of start assessing at step one and work your way through the process, mission, values, discipleship pathway, vision, by the time you get to strategy, you go, I know exactly what we need to be working on. It's really clear.
Mm-hmm.
So always work it in that order, from mission to values. And you might be fine. You might go, okay, step one, we really are good. No cracks in that. Our values, there's nothing hidden that is holding us back from fully living out healthy, actionable, biblical core values. We're good there. You may be able to breeze through those things, maybe, but you should always start your self-assessment at step one and then move your way to step 5. Not assume you're fine on steps 1 through 4. Let's just jump to step 5. That's a mistake. So going through the progression this way ensures that you're not just focusing on good strategies, you're focusing on the right good strategies.
There you go.
And the difference between those things is not inconsequential. Man, a lot of you guys have stayed plugged in the whole way through, and we're going to wrap this up. AJ, I hope that this has just been helpful on its face for helping people think through a framework, but we want to help churches execute this framework in a really weird year. So what are 2 ways, one way in particular that we want to emphasize today, but what are 2 ways that churches can get help working this framework?
Yeah, well, primarily of course we're guides at the Malfers Group. And so we walk through this framework with churches all the time. And you can certainly work with one of us one-on-one. And we call that process strategic envisioning. And you can find out more about that at malfersgroup.com. And we would love to connect with you and talk about, how that would work for us to get to know you and to be there with you and walk you through the framework. The other way is even easier, and it's an online process that we've taken the exact same thing and we've put it all online, and we call that Church Revitalization University. And you can check that out at thatlongname.com, churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. Yeah. And that's kind of where we were leading up to today, because we are running our fall semester right now, and of that process, and it closes today. Scott, it closes today. We've been talking about it for weeks, and people are waiting until the last minute.
Yeah. So listen, I know the last thing you want is more content, and the last thing you want is just more stuff to do. I get that. We don't want that for you either. But if you want to make a plan for 2021, you really need a framework, and you need to work that framework. And we want you to have access to this and to be able to use this and to do it on your own. So it includes all the training. So you can set up a TV screen connected to your computer, run the training with your leadership team. We even should tell you who should be involved in the process. We walk you through all that. You get your team together, you watch the training videos. You don't have to do a thing for that. And then we show you. Bobby asked, how do you know what's working, what's not working? We show you how to do that. So we have tools that we use to help your team assess different things and to put different things in place. We have what we call facilitator videos that show you how to use the same tools that we use when we work on site with the church. We show you how to draw it on the flip chart. We show you what to look out for. And we even have it written out in PDFs, like step 1, do this. So that way you have a cheat sheet as you're going through the workshop. You don't have to remember what you watched in the video. You can go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm supposed to say this next, and give the team stuff. So we've really basically make you a consultant for your own church. Some churches prefer the totally handheld approach where we come on site and do it for you. But we know you don't have that kind of time, and we know you may not have the resources to do that. So we put together this fully digital version of it so that to empower you to do it yourself. If you are wanting to plan for 2021, not with certainty, because no one knows what tomorrow holds, but with clarity for where it is you're trying to go and what you need to focus on, you can do that. And churchrevitalizationuniversity.com, that process can do that for you. So we're doing 20% off right today. today only, as it closes out.
Yeah.
I think the stock price on it, guys, is $9.99. It's $1,000, which is cheaper than bringing us on site. But you can get 20% off, brings it down to $7.99. Just use the code, I think, podcast20, maybe. I don't know. I'll put it in the comments.
Should we be certain on the codes?
I know that there's one that's thank you 20, and it's 20% off. You just write thank you 20, and that'll take 20% off. You can also, if that doesn't work for you and you need to do a monthly thing so that you don't have to run it through your finance team, I know that. I've been there. I know what you're talking about. There's that option's available. That same promo code, thank you 20, will take 20% off that too. So it brings the monthly amount down. And if none of that's good for you and you're like, I just don't have it. We're a nonprofit. Malphurs Group is a nonprofit organization. We are not trying to make $1 off you, despite what people might want to write in comments. I promise you, our motivation is not to make $1 off of your church. It's to help you. We know that you have to have skin in the game for you to actually execute. That's why it's not completely free. But if your church can't afford even 20% off of what we're asking, you send an email to leadership@malphursgroup.com and we'll make it work. What you can pay, you got to pay something, otherwise you won't do it. But you tell us what you can pay and we'll make it work. We're not trying to make $1 off you. We want to serve you. So go to churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. It is going to close. Registration is going to close tonight. We want you to sign up for this because you need a framework. We want to help you work the framework. It needs to not be difficult or complicated. It needs to be done for you. And that's what Church Revitalization University does. It's a done for you strategic planning process that doesn't have a model, AJ, in mind. Like there's not a stock result that you're going to get at the end of this thing. It's going to be completely unique to you, but it gives you the tools and processes to come to the right answers for your church. So churchrevitalizationuniversity.com, use the code THANKYOU20. It'll take 20% off the one-time or the monthly option. And if that doesn't work, email us, leadership@malphursgroup.com. We will make sure that you have access to this process. We don't want anyone to not have it because they can't afford it. Okay. Anything you want to add to that, AJ? We hate selling things. So we're not trying to sell something. We're trying to serve you.
I pinned that in the comments. So the coupon code's in there, links to malphursgroup.com, churchrevitalizationuniversity.com. And we're glad to stick around a few more minutes if there's any questions. So a bunch of you are still online. If you've got any other questions about the framework or about anything, we would love to answer them. Thanks, Charlie. Glad that was helpful. Yeah, thanks, Young. Thanks, Rob. We appreciate you guys being on here with us. And we're international as well. Quebec representing from the Great White North.
That's right. All right, guys. Any other questions? You can ask them here. We'll answer them as we follow up. You can also shoot us an email, leadership@malphursgroup.com. Please, just sign up for this. You got nothing to lose. If you sign up for it and you hate it, we'll refund your money. Just don't go into 2021 without a plan. There's no reason for it. You can walk into 2021 with clarity for the future, and this is a tool to help you. So thank you guys for tuning in, man. So many of you guys stayed in, locked in this whole time. Really appreciate it. Love you guys, and we're here to serve you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.